Hi students, this is Mr. Yang. Today we are going to continue to learn more about unit circle. In this lesson and the next lesson, we're going to learn a few different ways that we can use the unit circle to get some information. But first, let's recall something that we have learned. Signs of trig function. We use this little catchphrase to help us. All students take calculus, which again means inside the first quadrant, everything is positive. Inside the second quadrant, sine is positive. Third quadrant, tangent is positive. And fourth quadrant, cosine is positive. So let me draw it out. All, and then inside second quadrant is sine, third quadrant is tangent, and then fourth quadrant is cosine. Everything else is going to be negative. And of course, sine is also going to be related to cosecant, tangent is going to be related to cotangent, and cosine is going to be related to secant. But a few different things. Even if we have those signs, we still need to know the specific values for these axes. And so, for example, the 0 degree, that is 1, 0. Then we have the 0, 1, negative 1, 0, and the 0, negative 1. Which means in order to know the exact value, if it's positive, negative, 0, or undefined, we do also need to know how the trig ratios are represented with the coordinates. So right here it is. Sine theta is y over r. Since r is 1, sine theta is just y. And cosine theta would be x, and tangent would be y over x. As for cosecant, secant, and cotangent, they're just the reciprocals of their corresponding trig ratios. But something to be careful, cotangent and tangent, for example, even if they are reciprocals, it's still better to remember it as x over y. Since, let's say your tangent happens to be undefined. You can't exactly type in your calculator a 1 over undefined. That won't tell you anything. So that doesn't work. You do need to know exactly what it is. Okay, and then in your notes, you actually don't have this table, but let's just quickly recall some values from the first quadrant as a quick review. So if you remember, we have said, remembering trig values is just like counting 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So for sine, it will be 0, which basically is square root 0 over 2. And then we have the square root of 1 over 2, which is 1/2. And then square root of 2 over 2, square root of 3 over 2. And lastly, the square root of 4 over 2, which is just 1. And cosine, you can either choose to start from 90 and going down to 0, but still count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can choose to just count backwards 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So the 0 degree would be a 1, and the 30 degree would now go down to square root of 3 over 2, then square root of 2 over 2, 60 degree is 1/2, and 90 degree for cosine is going to be a 0. Now tangent is y over x. My sine is y, my cosine is x. I'm basically doing y divided by x. 0 divided by 1 is a 0. 1 divided by square root of 3 is a 1 over square root of 3, which simplifies to be square root of 3 over 3. Next, square root of 2 over square root of 2 is just a 1. Then square root of 3 over 1 is just square root of 3. Next, 1 over 0, that's where we have the undefined. So 90 degree for tangent is undefined. Moving on to the examples. The first example, it didn't ask you for any specific value. It also didn't ask you to specify what angles they are. It simply is asking you to decide if the value is positive, negative, 0, or undefined. So a few things again. First quadrant is everything is positive. Second quadrant is sine. Third quadrant is tangent. And fourth quadrant is cosine. Then we also have a few values that we need to know. That is 1, 0. This is 0, 1. That is negative 1, 0. And that is 0, negative 1. Okay, to also help with that, sine is y. Cosine is x. And tangent is y over x. We also have cosecant. That is 1 over y. And secant is 1 over x, and cotangent is x over y. Sine D. Okay, we see D is right here, the second quadrant, and second quadrant sine happens to be positive, so the first one will be positive. Next, secant B. That is basically the same as deciding about cosine B. Let's see. B is in the first quadrant. Inside the first quadrant, cosine is positive, so of course 1 over cosine B will still be positive. Next, cosine g. G is right here. Cosine is our x value for g, and in that case, it's a 0. Next, cotangent A. You can choose to just remember it as x over y. So let's have a look. X over y is 1 over 0, and that is going to be undefined. Or you can think it as, oh, at point A, when it's 0 degree, my tangent is 0, so I'm going to do 1 over 0, no matter what. Okay, cosine f. F is inside the third quadrant. Inside the third quadrant, only tangent and cotangent will be positive, so of course cosine would have to be negative. Cosine A, cosine, remember, is the x value, so at A, the value itself is actually 1, but the question didn't ask you for a specific value, it's just asking you to decide if it's positive, negative, 0, or undefined. In this case, positive. G is sine H. H is inside the fourth quadrant, and inside the fourth quadrant, only cosine and secant are going to be positive, so in that case, sine has to be negative. Cosecant H, that is the same as asking 1 over sine H. We have just decided in G that sine H is negative. 1 over that will still be negative. I is cotangent F. F is a third quadrant angle. And inside the third quadrant angle, tangent is positive. So it happens that means cotangent would also be positive. So here it is. Cotangent F is positive. So that's where we can use the all student take calculus inside each quadrant to help decide if it's positive, negative, 0, or undefined. Of course, the 0 and undefined are a bit tricky because they typically happen when you are on on the 0 degree, 90 degree, 180 degree, or 270 degrees. So be careful with that. Okay, moving on to the next example. This time it is asking us to represent things. So let me write down again. Sine is y, cosine is x, tangent is y over x. That means cosecant is 1 over y, secant is 1 over x, and cotangent is x over y. So here it is. It's asking you to use the letters that are given to represent the value. It didn't ask you to find the exact value. So basically, we just need to understand how to use the x coordinates and the y coordinates to represent all of these different trig functions. So A, cosine 180 degrees. 180 degrees right here is actually using the point I, J. But cosine is just the x, so that would just be I. Next, tangent 270. 270 right there is m n. And tangent will be y over x. My y is n, my x is m, so it's just going to be n over m. Next, sine 330 degree, inside the fourth quadrant, closer to the 360, so it has to be the point P, comma Q. And for sine, it is the y value, so it's just going to be Q. D, secant 270, that means it's using the point M, N. You can first think cosine is the x, so it is the m, but secant is the reciprocal of that, so it's got to be 1 over x, so it's 1 over m. Cosecant 30 degree, so inside the first quadrant, the only point we have is C, comma D, so cosecant 30 must be related to that one. Cosecant is 1 over y, or it's 1 over sine, so in this case, it has to be 1 over D. F is cosine 135, second quadrant. The point itself is G, comma H. Cosine is just the x coordinate, so it's just G. Cotangent 330, that is the fourth quadrant angle, so P, comma Q. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, so it has to be x over y, so it's P over Q. H is secant 90 degree. 90 degree is the point E, comma F. Secant is 1 over cosine. So in other words, 1 over x. 1 over E. Tangent 240, that's a third quadrant angle, and the only one in there is the KL. And tangent is y over x, so it's got to be L over K. J is cosine negative 330, so you're kind of going backwards into the when it's getting closer to a negative 360, so it has to be the point C, comma D. Cosine is the x value, so it's just going to be C. Next, sine negative 120. That is going to be passing 90 degrees, so it's going to be a third quadrant, so it's KL. Sine is the y value, so that is just going to be L. Last one, cotangent negative 225. So you're going backwards, and you are going past 180 degrees, so it's going to be the point GH. Cotangent is x over y, so it's going to be G over H. Now here's the thing, for these trig ratios inside the Cartesian plane, you really don't have to memorize it. Just think about it, when you have a unit circle and just draw a standard triangle, this is your x coordinate, this is your y coordinate, you should be very clear about what the standard angle is right there. So in that case, if r is 1, you can easily deduct that the sine has to be the y value, y over 1, the cosine has to be the x over 1. And in that case, tangent is y over x. So that's pretty easy for you to kind of figure out on the spot. So that is everything for this 5.8d lesson. We'll learn a bit more in the next lesson. Thank you.